So hi again everyone, and welcome to another video here from Mad About Madeira. And this video today is going to be, it's not intended to be, but I could see where it may be considered, it's not even controversial. Down in the comment section, people may make it controversial, but it's not intended to be controversial. It's intended to be educational, shall we say. Not that I'm an educator, I love to share information, and not that I am an official historian, though I love history. But I'm going to try to see what I can put out with this. So again, I'm sure it's going to be one of those videos that's going to make some people feel somewhat uncomfortable and awkward. But I never said that this channel was going to be a channel that was going to be a touristy type channel with the ones that you generally see when it comes to videos about Portugal and Madeira. People frolicking through the levadas and the forests and running around in the hills and drone footage and so forth. Love those videos. I absolutely love them. Just not doing them right now because I'm not in Madeira as yet to get away with doing videos like that. So right now it's just me sitting here talking to you guys and hoping that I can generate some discussion every now and again in the meantime surrounding Madeira and Portugal. So that's basically what I am doing right now, and just passing the time away until we can get out of here and get over to Madeira. So what I want to talk today about, it's the fact that Portugal is trending. Madeira is trending. You know, I just saw a topic today on Facebook where someone, it looks like they were looking for trouble, but they asked the question, why are so many people moving to Madeira? I looked through a couple of the comments and so forth, but it's a valid question. Why is that happening nowadays? I look at that as a one answer. The pandemic. The pandemic changed so much. It opened up so many new opportunities. And Madeira has always had people moving there, as far as I understand, notably from England and from other spots in Europe. But the thing about it now, it looks like Americans clear across the Atlantic have caught on, and now they're traveling there. So Portugal, Madeira, Portugal, it's trending. Those places are trending right now. You know, Madeira, of course, being a part of Portugal, an autonomous area, but it's trending. And while Portugal is trending, so is its history. And it's being mentioned and it's being brought up. It's being brought up for various reasons. For example, there's a new movie that's coming out soon. I think it's coming out sometime this month with Viola Davis, and it's called The Warrior King, and it deals with the Dahomean kingdom, which today that country is known as Benin in Africa, in West Africa, but it deals with that kingdom and their fight against, I think it was the French, who were trying to take over that kingdom at that particular time. So around that subject, and I'm a part of a few other Facebook pages that deal with Africa and various parts of Africa. And every now and again, you're going to see the mention of the Portuguese when it comes to the transatlantic slave trade. Portugal, unfortunately, has that notorious reputation of being the first Western European country to engage in the transatlantic slave trade. I don't think any Portuguese will deny that. I don't think that they will say it never happened. But there can be some ways that they try to mitigate perhaps the impact. I want to say they, I don't mean every Portuguese, mind you. So there can be some struggles there when it comes around to Portugal. And I'm going to get to all of that here in a minute, okay? So I know I'm here speaking about Portugal right now. I am not from the country, though I have ancestry from there. And I know it may come off as an offense that here I am talking about Portugal and mentioning their role in the transatlantic slave trade. I know it's not a comfortable subject, and I know it causes a lot of angst when it comes to that topic being brought up. But for me personally, I'm going to get to all of that. So don't get turned off right now and think, hey, who's this black guy or who's this guy out here going to be talking about my country like this and talking about, we're sick and tired of hearing about that. Just stick with me. You'll see where I'm getting with this, okay? And I'm going to try to be as fair and as objective and as unbiased as I possibly can be. Here's part of the reason why I'm even bringing this up. I've mentioned in another video that when I went to Portugal and I came back, I was all excited, even before I went there. Let me go back to before I got there. When I was doing some research and finding out that my family came from Madeira, or following up on that information, because I did know that from a few years earlier, but I never really followed up on it. So I went to a particular Guyanese page because my wife is from Guyana. And I went to a Guyanese page and I was just sharing the information. And the reason why I was sharing the information, as you've known from another video, it's because there are a lot of Guyanese people who are of Portuguese descent. So I figured by sharing the information, it would be well received by the people. Like, hey, I didn't know this, I didn't know that, I never really delved into my family roots when it comes to Portugal. And I did get, that was the majority of people who gave that kind of feedback. But there were a couple of naysayers in there. First thing they came in with, it's more or less like, why are you so into learning about Portugal? What's the big deal? Do you know what the Portuguese did? And did you know that Portugal was the how they were involved in the slave trade and so forth? So I heard that and I was just like, they're not wrong in what they're saying, but it was as if they were basically saying, even if you're connected to Portugal through ancestry, why would you want to celebrate that? Or why would you want to be proud of that? Do you know what they did? And I had to point out to a few people there that the people in the Caribbean, as I've explained in another video, the people of Portuguese descent in the Caribbean, they are not descendants of course, I should say immediately descended from people who were Portuguese colonizers or Portuguese people living in the Caribbean who owned enslaved Africans. That was not the case. Most of the people in the Caribbean, if not just about all of them, who have Portuguese ancestry, they are people who descended from later Portuguese, especially from the island of Madeira and the Azores, who came over to the Caribbean in the mid-1800s, when slavery in the Caribbean was long ended or had ended. They came over after the fact to replace or to fill the void of that labor vacuum that was left behind after the enslaved Africans were freed and they walked off the plantations. So, for example, my ancestors did not come over with swords. They did not come over with a ship full of enslaved Africans. They came over as poor peasants looking for a better life in the Caribbean. So I wanted to make that distinction, that the people in the Caribbean, they are not descended from the Portuguese of 500 years ago. Okay? So that distinction needs to be made. Now, if you're talking about this side of the world, on the western side of the Atlantic, and you're talking about the Portuguese and you want to talk about slavery and so forth, then you can go to Brazil to talk about that, because that was the only Portuguese colony on this side of the world. Now, some people may feel, some black folks on this side of the world may feel that they need to have a certain solidarity with the black people of Brazil and say, well, you know what? I'm going to stand up with my black brothers over there. And if they don't care for the Portuguese, well, I'm not going to care for them either. Okay, I'm not into all of that right now. So I wanted to just make that distinction up front, just to make some things clear. That's basically number one. So you hear this all the time, that they were the the first European country that involved themselves in the transatlantic slave trade. That's one of the things that's generally mentioned there. Now, another thing I want to point out is this. In speaking to some Portuguese people, I could understand this, where when people make this comment, they may get somewhat defensive. And the reason why they may get defensive is because it almost sounds like when people say it, they don't make distinctions and they're not going through and drawing lines along certain things. So when you make that statement, oh, the Portuguese, they're racist, or the Portuguese, do you know what they were involved in? When you say that, I think to the everyday modern day Portuguese, it's as though you're indicting them and saying, I'm also blaming you. I'm also holding you responsible for the crimes of your ancestors from 500 years ago. And I could understand the everyday Portuguese will feel a certain way, like, why are you pointing at me? Why are you looking at me? You know, I didn't enslave anybody. I didn't do anything to anybody. As a matter of fact, I think that whole thing was horrific. That's not me. Don't judge me by them. This is modern day Portugal. You know, the country itself in the past, on the different, well, the monarchies and so forth, on the different people, a different time, a different frame of mind. That is what they did. We have long passed that stage. And now we're living in modern times where we live in a bigger world and have a better understanding of how the world works. And we didn't, looking from where we are right now, we're like you. We don't agree with what was done back then. Now, granted, they may benefit in today's world from what happened back then. They may not know how, they may not know in what way, and maybe some of them are not benefiting from it. Maybe a lot of them are not. You probably do have some very rich families who came from back in those days, but it's not the everyday Portuguese. So they feel a certain level of defensiveness when statements are made about their country today and about them. And they feel as though, why are you pointing a finger at me and saying anything about me? You're not making any distinctions. You're just saying the Portuguese, or do you know Portuguese people are? And they feel a certain offense when that's made. And I could definitely understand why they would feel a certain way when it comes to things like that. So I want to point that out. So the other thing that I do find, though, is that sometimes when you have some Portuguese people, and again, I'm using that word some, okay? I don't know every Portuguese person. I've spoken to a few here and there, just looking at them on certain pages, Portuguese pages and so forth, and watching the reaction. Even on some African pages that I'm a part of, I've seen Portuguese come in, and I've seen what has gone on. And I think, as I said before, because Portugal is now trending, their history is also coming back into focus. And it's coming back into focus. I'm noticing that there are certain people from Portugal who are like apologists right now, meaning to defend their country, to defend their country's honor, to defend, I wouldn't say the history, but to somewhat shed some light in it and give a better perspective of perhaps how things are going on. So, for example, you will hear things like, Portugal was the first European country to abolish slavery. That is true, but it comes with a small little caveat that's sometimes not mentioned. In the Kingdom of Portugal, mainland Portugal, yes, they were the first European country to end it within their immediate kingdom. In Portugal itself, it was ended in the mid 1700s, somewhere around there, maybe mid to late 1700s, long before all the other European nations that eventually abolished slavery. What is not mentioned, though, is that in its colonies overseas, slavery still persisted. It still continued. Now, I don't know how much control mainland Portugal had over their colonies far-flung wherever it is. I don't know if those colonies could do their own thing, but they were still pretty much under the Portuguese flag. I have no idea. But while it was ended on mainland Portugal, it still continued in their colonies in Africa, in Brazil, and so forth, okay? That's another thing that goes on. So I want to explain that. Now, I think also you may have some people who may look at it where it may be, well, the French were really bad with slavery, but we Portuguese were not as bad as them, and so forth. So then it comes down to, well, we had slavery, but it wasn't as bad as theirs. You hear this, you hear that every now and again with the French and the British, because the French were really brutal in a place like Saint Domingue, which we call Haiti today. They were really brutal with their slavery there. Then you look at the British, and well, the British wasn't as bad as the Spanish, and the Spanish wasn't as bad as the French, and you have all this going on. But the bottom line was, it was still slavery. It was still owning other people, or saying that you own other people, and putting them through horrific conditions, and they have no rights, and they have to work for you free of charge, basically. Now, of course, in all these colonies, you had anomalies, and you had situations where there were actually literal people who you would say were from the side of the enslavers, who actually had love affairs, true love affairs with people of African descent and so forth. You had all these nuances here and there and so forth. For example, like in Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic today, the Spanish basically left that colony to itself, and the people were just basically, the Spanish who were there were marrying the local women and the African women and those, and so you have all those nuances that were going on. So you can go ahead and you can try to maybe go ahead and try to minimize and say, well, it wasn't as bad as people say that it was and so forth. But the bottom line is, it still comes down to people's rights were being trampled on. People's rights were just not put in place. And there were a group of people that were like, we are the ones ruling over you. You've got to follow our rules. You've got to follow our whatever we're doing. We are the head honchos here. You do our work. You do our dirty work. You're our slaves. Okay, so you'll sometimes hear something like that along the way. So that's another thing that goes on there. So I would recommend probably not going that route, because you kind of get some pushback when it comes to using that kind of excuse, if I can use that. It wasn't as bad, so you might want to just not go through with something like that. So those are the type of things that I basically see here. But another thing with Portugal that it has a notorious reputation for. I want to say reputation. I'm not talking about the country today. I'm just talking about its history. Another thing was, long after the other European countries had given up their colonies, had basically said, okay, we're done with this thing about colonization. Most of these countries were, in Africa, or most of these colonies at least were in Africa. And, they carved up Africa amongst themselves in the late 1800s. And they held on to these places, exploited these places in Africa, created artificial borders of countries that we know today in Africa that didn't have those borders when they were left to themselves. But when the Europeans came in, they carved up Africa and created all these artificial borders. Nigeria, for example, there wasn't a country known as Nigeria prior to the Europeans showing up. So with Portugal, on the other hand, though, while England and France and Spain, they had long since gotten rid of colonies and said, we're done with that. We're washing our hands. We're moving on. We're just going to stick with our own country and form our countries. And we'll just leave these people to themselves. Of course, left them in a very bad condition in some cases, but we're going to just leave these people over here to govern themselves and do whatever they're doing. Portugal, on the other hand, held on to these colonies for quite some time. Okay? And they held on to these colonies into the 70s, and they held on to them to the point where they engaged in wars against these African countries. Like, you trying to get freedom? What's that all about? That's not happening. And they went to war. They went to war. The people rose up in these African colonies and said, no. We're sick and tired of this. We don't want any more of this. This colonization thing is just not, it's one-sided. You guys are getting all the benefit out of this. You're exploiting the country or exploiting the land, and it's really your people who are benefiting from this because you guys are running the institutions and whatever, and we, the local people, we're not benefiting from this. So they rose up, they rebelled. Portugal was like, we're not having that. Let's go to war over this. So they held on tight. Now, I say all of that because, again, it looks very bad in Portugal, right? It looks very bad in the country itself. But here's something that a lot of people may not look into. You have to understand that during this time, Portugal, from a long time prior to that, was under a dictatorship. So They're under dictatorship, so meaning that this was more or less the government. They didn't care what the people thought about these colonies. They didn't care what the people may have thought or what the people may have wanted. This was a dictatorship, and as a dictatorship in their own country, they governed their overseas colonies in the same way, with an iron fist. We're going to hold you down, just like we're holding down our own people here in the country of Portugal. Just like we're squashing their rights, and we are going to tell them how things go. The same way the dictatorship handled their overseas colonies. This is why I'm saying you can't take all the Portuguese people and say, look at what you guys did. This was their government who was doing this overseas. Not saying you probably didn't have Portuguese people in Portugal who were not in favor of something like that, and not saying that you did not have Portuguese people living in the colonies who may have been from Portugal itself, or who may have been born to Portuguese parents or Portuguese grandparents living in those African colonies, who did not also agree with the dictatorship and saying, yeah, we need to rule over these people. We need to rule over these local people right here. We're going to dominate them. Not saying you didn't have those people, mind you, but just wanted to put that into perspective. But here's what happened. Was it in 1973, if I'm not mistaken? The Portuguese people rose up and staged a coup. Bloodless coup at that. Nobody lost their lives as far as I know. And they were sick and tired of that. They were like, why does our country have to be the backward one? Why does our country have to be the odd man out? England doesn't have colonies. Spain doesn't have colonies anymore. Colonialism is a thing of the past. What's up with this? So you have a new generation of people coming in, and they'll with a new world, a new thinking. That stuff is old school. We don't want to be a part of that stuff. And they rose up against that government and said, we don't want you around anymore. We don't want you ruling over us with this iron fist and this dictatorship. We want a democracy. And they rose up, they overthrew that government, and sure enough, just as they overthrew the government, guess what happens to the colonies in Africa? You guys are free. We're done with that nonsense. We don't want that anymore. We're a democracy, and we're going to go ahead and focus on our own country. And ever since then, one of the things I've noticed about Portugal is that it has pretty much stayed in its corner, minded its own business, does not involve itself with other nations and their affairs. I'm not saying that they probably haven't at some point, but they're not out there bombing other countries. They're not going out there involving themselves and overthrowing governments and using their secret police or their CIA or their M6 or whatever you call them in England, whatever. They're not going into other countries and affecting their elections and doing all those type of things. Portugal, for the most part, which was why I say it's because it's trending, its history is coming back into focus. But they're pretty much minding their own business, focusing on their own affairs, not involving themselves with other people. And that's pretty much what Portugal has been doing and has been doing for quite a few years now. So I say all that to say this, and I put all this out there because I don't know who's going to stumble into this video. And there may be some people who may be going around, yeah, Portugal is this and Portugal is that, and do you know they're racist? And they may come across this video, and hopefully they listen to this video and hear somewhat of a different perspective. The other thing is, I am coming from the United States. And here in this country, one of the things that I do notice with other parts of the world, and I've noticed it in Portugal also, here in the United States, I have to admit, we are obsessed with color. Okay? In the United, and it's just a part of just how we're fashioned. It's like black, white, end of story. That's what it comes down to. You go to other countries in the world, they're not as hung up on it as such. They're not walking around the place like making sure everything, because America has this really weird thing that we still hold on to, that a person could go down the street and they could be 99% white. But the way that it worked in this country was that if you had a great grandfather that they found out was a black person, but yet he married a white woman and had children with that white lady, and all their children married white people, and just went all the way down the line. Once they found out you had what they call, I think it was called a one drop rule, or I forgot what it was called, but one drop of blood from a black person, doesn't matter how you look, you're a white. I mean, you're black. That's the end of story. And then we were also taught that it's like because you're considered black, well, you're supposed to just side with or identify with the black side of you and just completely reject the other side of you, the other parent, so to speak, which is kind of weird. But that's basically how it goes on over here. So we're somewhat obsessed with that. Not somewhat, really obsessed. Everything just seems to be black, white, black, white, black, white, black, white. Even sometimes I hate to use the term and I hate to say it like that, but it's just how we're identified. Like we might go ahead and over here in the United States, well, I'm not really black, you know, I am mixed with this and I'm mixed with that. But yet the white community is just going to see your skin color and say you're white. I mean, you're black. End of story. I don't care if your great grandfather was a white man from England. I don't care if your great grandmother was a white woman from Ireland or whatever. We found out that your grandfather was a black man from Senegal or something like that. So you're black. End of story. And that's how it operates over here. So it comes down to that, and it has all these type of things. But as I said before, for me personally, I have had to deal with that because when I came back from my trip, which is the other side of what I was going to tell you, when I came back from my trip, and I'm so excited telling people about my trip to Portugal, and I come back, hey, I went to Portugal, beautiful country, really loved it over there. The people are so friendly, got along, and I am not the only person saying that. Just about all the testimonials you see about people who go to Portugal, generally it's very good in their reviews. It's a beautiful place. The people are friendly. I felt safe. I felt comfortable. I didn't feel any particular way. I didn't feel out of place or anything like that. I didn't have anyone looking at me strange. I'm the one going ahead and saying that. But when I came back and I was talking, first thing, people just knew I went to Portugal. And their first thing they're thinking, you went to Europe. Isn't that where white people are? How did you feel? Did you feel out of place? Or if I'm telling them things like I want to move to Portugal, but you're a black person, why? Isn't that a white country? So I get these questions. People say this kind of stuff. And when they're not saying that, I have the other group of people that come to me who figure that they know their history and like, I don't know it. It's like, well, do you know Portugal? Do you know that they're racist? Why are they racist? Well, do you know they were involved in slavery? I know that, but why do you think that because they were 500 years ago, 400 years ago, that makes you think that the entire population of Portugal today is racist? That's kind of a silly statement to make. And I said, here's something that you have to understand. Of course, even here on this channel, a particular individual mentioned this to me, that the Portuguese can be racist, and this is what they mentioned to me. And of course, I would be very naive to think that you're not going to find some racist people in a place like Portugal, just like I would be crazy to think I can't go to England and find some there. I can't go to Russia and find some there. Here in the United States, I'm not going to find any. I'll be naive to think of that. But I tend to look at it in a particular type of way. The everyday modern Portuguese person is probably not thinking along those lines per se. Okay? Going about their business, minding their own business. I think that where the distinction comes in is a couple of ways. One, I think that you still have Portuguese people today who are older, who lived in the African colonies and left when those colonies became free or rid themselves of Portuguese colonization. And they fled back to Portugal. But when they were in Africa there, they probably had those racist notions and brought them back to Portugal with them. You're probably talking about people who are in their 70s and their 80s and their 90s and who have these racist ideas in their minds. Or they have parents that came from those places and they're up in age themselves, but they had parents that came back and brought back these racist notions about people in Africa or had these racist whatever. So yes, usually that's what you find. You're going to find a bunch of old people who are just hung up on the past and still have these racist ideas. Does this mean every Portuguese person thinks like that? I strongly doubt it. The young Portuguese that are out there right now thinking like that, I strongly doubt it. But It does not remove the fact that people would look at things like where there were soccer matches in Europe and you had people in the crowd making monkey noises at the African players and so forth. So these type of things are what people see, and when they see this, they think, see, told you, they told you the Europeans were racist. Look at what they're doing out there. It doesn't mean that that stadium is filled with everybody from that country. So it'll be unfair to go ahead and think that everyone from that country happens to be racist. But I think when you meet those type of people, they're usually older, or it's some younger people who have nothing else better to do, or they hung up on some nationalistic and xenophobic ideas and so forth. But again, I would go out on a limb right now, put my neck on the line, and say that is not your average everyday Portuguese. Will you find a person here and there who has their racist ideas? Chances are you will. But if you sit down and you have respect and you speak to people in a particular respectful way, they look at you as just being another human being like them, who has the same rights like that they do, and probably not looking at themselves as that they're being superior to you or anything like that. You're just another person that they just pass on the streets, and that's basically it. That's how I feel, and that's basically how I see it. The country, again, because it's trending right now, its history is coming forward. So a lot of Portuguese are now finding themselves in a position, and I'm not saying that they're encountering this, but every now and again they're probably going to be hearing about this type of stuff because the country's trending and people are, some people are just bringing up their history and so forth. Another thing I have observed or paid somewhat attention to, and I could be wrong with this, but I think what happens, you have black people who are moving. I just hate having to identify people by skin color. But anyway, black people are coming in from the United States and they're going to Portugal. But you also have African people who are coming from Africa and coming into Portugal. But the thing about it, the people coming from the United States, the black people coming from the United States, from what I have seen so far, generally are educated. They're coming from a country where they were making more money. They're coming from a country where they understand or they are accustomed to certain creature comforts. They have certain luxuries and everything, considering they're coming from the United States. Okay? Compare that to perhaps people coming from Africa. Not saying every African who's coming over is dirt poor, but probably coming over and probably don't have what the folks from the United States are coming over with. So you have black people from the United States and black people coming from Africa. And perhaps, so you have the black people coming from Africa, and when they come over, coming from the United States, they probably have the money to send their kids to nice private schools in Portugal. They probably have the money to maybe buy themselves a house or live in a relatively nice neighborhood, because again, they're coming from a country where the minimum wage on the money they're making is most likely going to be more than what the local Portuguese is making. But then you come from, so they're in a particular area of town where it's upscale, so they carry a certain aura about themselves. Perhaps now the people coming from Africa, they have to, a lot of them probably end up living in maybe the older areas, the more dilapidated areas, which I didn't really see any of that in Portugal anyway. But anyway, they probably live in the more rough areas of town, probably have a little bit more to struggle because they don't have much to work with and so forth. And usually when people have to go about living life in that kind of an environment, people look down on them and people think a certain thing about them, or people think that they're this, or people think that they're that. So you probably have that other dynamic going on there. I could be completely wrong, but you probably have that other dynamic going on. Now, will they mistake me for somebody from Mozambique or from Angola or something? I don't know. They may look at me and maybe the way I carry myself, maybe they may listen to me and, oh, he's an American, he's not an African, So I don't really know all about that. There are people in the comments section going to probably come in and explain all that to me. I really don't know. But these were just some things that I was basically looking into. And I'm hoping I was being fair and unbiased in regard to this. I mentioned some things that may make some people feel somewhat uncomfortable. I hope you understand I was not coming in here. I'm not a militant. I'm not coming in here, I hate white people and I wish this. I don't think like that. That's not me. As you know, I'm also celebrating the fact that I'm proud of the fact that I have ancestors that came from Madeira. It's a beautiful island. I love the people that I met there. I went to Portugal. I didn't have a problem with anyone. I didn't mind that. But I can compartmentalize and realize that that was 400, 500 years ago. Does it mean that some of that stuff hasn't trickled down to the modern day? Of course. I'm sure some of those racist attitudes from 500 years ago has trickled down with some people to this very day in various countries. I could understand that. But I'm the type of person, I do not go out into this world just looking at a person and automatically making assumptions about how they think about me. Some people may just see me as just another person walking down the street. They may say, well, hey, he respects me, I respect him. Hey, he's a cool guy, I'm cool with him also. He's okay with me, I'm okay with him, I have no problems. And you might have other people who may just look at me like, hey, there's a black man, I just don't like him just because of his skin color. I don't know. But I don't walk down the street and just like, well, that's a white person. That must mean they hate me. That's a Portuguese. That must mean they're racist. That's a German over there. He must hate Jewish people. I don't do stuff like that. I meet people as they come and deal with them as they come. I am a people person. My wife can tell you that. I will talk to anybody. I don't care how you're dressed. I don't care what religion you are. I don't care what country you come from. As a matter of fact, my wife will tell you that anytime I meet someone from another country, my eyes light up because I want to learn about your country. I want to learn about your culture. I'm always reading about different places. So that's basically how I am. Portugal just happens to be it's not really new. I've also always known about Portugal, but it's, moving there or going there is going to be like a new place for me to learn, to understand. Am I going to encounter someone who may give me some kind of vibe that they're racist? I probably will. But is that going to turn me around and say, well, oh, I see, that's what I don't like about these people. They're just this. I'm not that type of person. So I'm hoping, I'm not naive to know that certain things don't go on, but I don't go ahead looking for it onto every rock and making a big stink of everything and just thinking that because I was being an asshole, excuse my language, probably in my car doing some nonsense, someone blows their horn behind me to tell me get out of the way or what are you doing or whatever. See, they're racist. Yeah, I'm not going to do that type of stuff. I was just being an asshole. I was just doing something stupid and the person just got upset at me. They may just be a different color, maybe a different religion and whatever. They're upset at me because I'm doing something stupid, so those are the ways that I look at certain things. Now, this video, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up right now. I'm going to put it up. I did not even explain and even go through the whole thing about, as a matter of fact, you know what? Let me try see if I can do this in 3 minutes. The thing about it is that what I've told people is that if you're going to start studying the transatlantic slave trade, I think a lot of times with us as, here we go again, black people, we tend to think or look at it, especially on this side of the world, like our history began after Columbus came on this side of the world. And it's like, we don't think about anything else prior to that. I always encourage people to please study the thousands of years or the 1,000 years that led up to the transatlantic slave trade to get a better perspective and a better context. This does not mean it's going to alleviate or excuse anyone who was involved in the slave trade or anything, but it gives you a better understanding of what led up to that world. Because slavery in various forms were going on prior to the transatlantic slave trade. As a matter of fact, the Barbary Coast pirates and their slave trading, where they would go to Europe from North Africa, they would go over to Europe and capture Europeans and sell them into slavery in North Africa. While that's going on, the transatlantic slavery is going on, where you have Europeans taking Africans out of Africa and sending them to their colonies and enslaving them over there. So you had these two slave trades going on simultaneously. Not to mention the Arabs and the Muslim Arabs involving themselves in the slave trade, 700 years prior to the Europeans getting involved. So there was such a dynamic world that was going on that, the Iberian conquest by the Moors, the rise of the Ottoman Empire, the rise of the the Islamic Empire, all of these things shaped, formed, built the foundation that became, or that built up, or that led up to the the transatlantic slave trade. So you kind of have to understand that world back there leading all the way up. And then when you look at it, it will start to make a little bit more sense or put it into perspective. Again, the transatlantic slave trade was a horrible error. There's no excusing that whatsoever. But what it does, it brings so many different players into the game. You start to realize that there were so many hands that were involved. While the Europeans were the customer base, and they came up and said, we need those people so we can enslave them to put them in our colonies over here. Then you will also understand that in order for them to pull this off, they had to have local support in Africa itself. Some African kings, some African tribes involved themselves as being the middlemen to go ahead and go into the interior and capture war captives, and took them and said, Europeans, you want them? Here they are for a cost. So this transatlantic slave trade had a lot of moving parts. It had the customer base, the Europeans who wanted these people, and you had some African kings and some African kingdoms who were willing to go ahead and provide them for a cost. That's a whole other subject. But you have to understand all of that leading up to all of this to understand that there were hands all involved. Guilt can be passed around, and blame, I should say, could be passed around to different groups and different people that went on during this time. So by looking at it like that, and I have to take emotions out of it sometimes because, of course, I am also of African descent. And it was a horrible time, and I have to look back. My ancestors came over here in chains, just like my ancestors from Madeira came over in boats outside of chains. And I have to understand and look and put all this into perspective, to look at things more in a balanced way, that I'm not going to sit here as being a hateful person toward anyone because of what happened ages ago and years ago. We don't forget it, mind you. I'm not telling anyone to forget anything. I'm not telling anyone to shove it under a rug and forget about it like nothing ever happened. But I think you just have to just go ahead. It's only fair that you go ahead and not just look at it and just say 1492 forward, that's black people's history. No, you've got to look at what was Africa like, what was going on in Europe, what was going on in Asia. All of these places played a critical role in shaping and building the world that the transatlantic slave trade appeared in. So that's what I'm saying for right now. I'm sure there's a lot that I've forgotten, a lot that I've overlooked, a lot that I did not mention. And I'm sure there are going to be folks coming down into the comment section and going to have a lot to say. Probably a bunch of new people are going to be stumbling around and like they don't care about Portugal or Madeira or anything, and they're just going to be coming through, looking through YouTube videos and like, wait, what did he just say about Portugal and racism and slave trade? Let me hear what this guy has to say. I'm probably going to get those people also. I've never been one to shy away from controversy. As I said before, this was not intended to be a controversial subject. I was not intended to do that. This is not intended for anyone to come in here and go hating on anyone. That's not my intention either. Okay? But I just want to just go ahead and just bring this forward. And again, the basis of why I'm doing this is because as Portugal is trending, its history is also trending again. And people are discussing it. People are talking about it. You know, again, with me, I bring up Portugal and, oh, well, do you know they were involved in the slave trade? And yeah, but I had a great time over there. Well, do you know that I'll never go to Portugal. You know that they were involved in the slave trade. I'm not getting myself. I had to deal with all of that. And so I have to talk to people like that and give them, expand their scope and perhaps put things into better perspective and not go over there pointing fingers and labeling an entire country, and blaming them or holding them. Like here in the United States, for example, we have racial institutions that are still around, and the whole country was more or less propped up on racism, more or less, and we have all that going on and all of that type of stuff. Does it happen in other countries? It probably does. I don't know to the extent as it does here in the United States. So I think a lot of people here in the United States, black people, are traumatized, know what has gone on. And I guess if they go to another country where they see a lot of other people who are not their complexion, they may think the same thing goes on there that goes on over here in the United States. And I don't think that's always fair. Okay? So anyway, again, let me just wrap this video up. I said 3 minutes, but I'm going to wrap it up here now. I hope it was interesting. I hoped you watch it all the way to the end. And I want to thank you for tuning in. Again, this video is not intended to go out there from, it's not for me hating anyone. That's definitely far away from me. I'm not even thinking about anything like that. I really appreciate my subscribers, especially the folks that come in from Portugal, from Madeira. I really appreciate your compliments, your warm wishes, your welcoming. And I felt the love. Even when I went over there, felt the very, very, very same thing. Felt at home, felt at peace. No one bothered me. Everything was cool. And I'm going to still maintain that. And I'm still thinking that to this very day, which is one of the reasons why I would love to go to Madeira and live, which is what we're working on right now. If I didn't feel that way, I wouldn't be thinking about moving back over there. Okay? Anyway, again, thank you for tuning in here at Mad About Madeira. Can't wait to see what these comments are going to be all about. I'm sure my fingers are going to get tired from responding to people. But that's how I am. Here I am. Thank you again, okay? Anyway, you can, I guess you can share this if you want to. I would love if you can subscribe if you haven't subscribed us yet. And again, you can like, you can even dislike. I understand you have the right to do that. And I would love to see you in the comment section. All right, you guys take care. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until the next time. Hi again, folks. I know that last video, or the first part of this video ended. I ended with my little thank you for tuning in and so forth. But of course, I go back and I look over the videos, and sometimes I look back and I realize there's certain things that I forgot. Like I said, there was a lot of information that I forgot to mention. Do not take this as some sort of comprehensive video on race relations and all of Portuguese history and so forth. It definitely wasn't. But there are certain things that I look back at in the video and it's like, I should have said this or I should have said that. And one of the things that I actually wanted to talk about, and I'm just going to say it briefly, it was something profound that I heard one time. Again, I am from this side of the world. Even though I was born in the Virgin Islands, I've spent most of my life in the United States. And because I've spent most of my life here in the United States, I've gotten caught up in the whole everything is black and white type of thing, you know. Even though I am a people person, I get along with anybody, and you know, I don't get hung up on all these. I mean, of course, I will set a person straight if they're coming at me in a weird way in terms of racism or the sense of entitlement or so forth, you know. But I don't go around just despising people because of their skin. I don't have any weird ideas of people of a different color or anything like they're Neanderthals. Or I don't have no weird conspiracy theories. That was gross. Sorry about that piece of hair. Actually, I was shaving, so it's a small little piece of stubble. So sorry about that. But anyway, I don't go around doing that. But the person mentioned something to me where they said that we were talking about something and people were getting on them for their country not being as obsessed about color, skin color, as other people in the United States. This country is also predominantly black, if I can say that. So people were getting on them. And the person said to me, in your country, in the United States, you look at color first, or you lead with color. You lead with groupings and so forth, whereby in my country, we lead with nationality. In other words, you're Dominican first, and then you're whatever after. In your country, it's like you're black or you're white, and then you want to discuss things after that. And I thought about that, and I said, you know what? This person is making some sense. And I think what happens, which is why I've encountered the questions when I came back from my trip from Portugal, it's the fact that because of what we experience here in the United States and how we look at things and how we talk about things in terms of race, I think we go to other countries and think, well, hey, there's a white person, there's a black person, I wonder how. And we start talking about, instead of just saying, look at that Portuguese person walking down the street, no matter what color they are. They were born in Portugal, they're Portuguese, end of story. Over here, it's, well, you're an American, but you're black. You're an American, but you're white. Over there, it's, you're Portuguese. And I think, again, we leave from here with the way we're structured, the way we think about things, and we go elsewhere. And I guess we try to look at it through the filter of how we look at it over here, or how we basically talk about it. So I think that's not good. So that explains why when I came back, the question is not, hey, how are the Portuguese people? Are they wonderful? Or they? It's like, hey, isn't that a white country? There's a bunch of white people, right? How do they look at us black people? And that's the first thought that came through. But when I went there, that was not the vibe that I got from the people there. It's just like I went, again, I mentioned it a few times before. No one was looking at us like, oh my God, there's a black person. Oh, wow. For all they know, I may have been just another Portuguese walking down the street, just passing me like I didn't stand out. When I say I didn't stand out, no one was looking at me like, oh, look at that one person over there that's much darker than we are. It wasn't like that. I just didn't feel that at all. It was just life as usual. Now, I don't know when people sit down at their dinner tables, how they talk and whatever goes on there. But all I know when I went there, I just didn't feel that same type of designation that we put over here in the United States. So I guess, again, because of our collective trauma that people have had here on this side of the world because of slavery, and how Jim Crow afterwards, and separation and all that type of stuff, and all the trauma that came out from that, we go elsewhere to other parts of the world, and I guess we try to break it down in the very same way that we have it over here, and you kind of realize that people over there don't look at it like how we look at it over here, so it becomes very confusing. And again, that's why I was bombarded with all these questions. How do they treat black people? How do they look at black people? How they interact with black people? And it's like, that's not what I saw. It's basically, how do they interact with each other as Portuguese? That's what I saw. That was my experience, and that's how I saw it. So I just want to sort of mention that. So I know this video was all over the place with a lot of different things, race relations, slavery, and all those different types of things. But I want to actually focus on that. And again, I want to emphasize one more time that this video was not intended to be controversial. People may come down in the comment section and somebody's going to make some sort of comment. Somebody's going to probably take offense, and then there we go. But this video, me talking right now, was not intended for it to go to point at anyone, that anyone could go and hate on anyone or anything like that. That's not who I am. So I just wanted to basically bring this video up again because Portugal is trending, and because it's trending, so is its history. I'm not saying everyone is paying attention to that. I just happen to notice it because I'm all over Facebook. I'm all over different social media sites, and I look and I see what's being mentioned, what's being talked about. So that's for me. I don't know about anyone else, but that's why I mention it's trending, because of what I tend to see and what I come across. And I just figured I'll just do a video on it and address the situation the best way that I could. Okay? Just wanted to add this in. Again, thank you for tuning in, and thank you for sticking around to even listen to this part. All right? So you guys take care. From Mad About Madeira to you, you enjoy your day or your night, and thank you for tuning in.